Welcome from the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Livestock Systems. This training module will explain how to develop training manuals that are designed for use by trainers. This video is the fifth in the series on how to develop a Training of Trainers manual. In the last video, the objective was to align evaluations with learning objectives. By the end of this video, you will be able to align subject matter content with the learning objectives. After we have aligned appropriate evaluation methods with the objectives, as discussed in video 4, we then align the instructional content and methods with the learning objectives. This includes lectures, case studies, discussion prompts, practice activities, and so on. The learning objectives should provide the guide for what instructional content must be included in the training. Many times, you will find that as you develop the instructional materials, additional objectives must be added. The backward design method discussed in video 2 is an iterative process. It is normal and expected to make modifications as you progress through the development of your training manual. Let's look at a couple examples of how to align instructional content with learning objectives. This objective is the community animal health worker will be able to conduct a basic health examination of goats, cattle, and chickens. So, what instructional content is necessary for the participant to have the appropriate knowledge, skills, attitudes, or behaviors required to be able to perform this objective? This might include content on how to take the temperature of animals, checking the health of skin, examining ears, eyes, and throat, and so on. This objective is identify common diseases in dairy cattle, including mastitis, parasites, and bovine respiratory disease complex. Again, what instructional content is necessary for the participants to have the appropriate knowledge, skills, attitudes, or behaviors required to be able to perform this objective? This might include content on an introduction to the diseases that commonly afflict cattle, how to identify symptoms that can be discovered through a physical examination, how to collect blood samples, how to read the results of lab tests, and so on. The objectives also help us to determine how to teach the instructional materials. The objectives tell us what the participants must be able to do at the end of the training. The instructional content should lead the participants down a path that will ultimately lead to them being able to perform the objective. Let's go back to the two objectives we just saw and see an example of what might be the best methods to use to teach the content. This objective is the community animal health worker will be able to conduct a basic health examination of goats, cattle, and chickens. The instructional content will include topics such as how to take the temperature of animals, checking the health of skin, examining ears, eyes, and throat, and so on. First, we might have a short 15 to 20 minute lecture on the tasks that must be conducted during a routine examination of an animal. Remember, 15 to 20 minutes is shown by research to be the most appropriate for the retention of information. Next, groups are formed and the participants are provided with the medical instruments that are used to conduct routine examinations of various animals. This is likely accompanied by a demonstration from the instructor and a practice activity with the participants. Then, the instructor might give another lecture on how to distinguish between a healthy animal and animals that are displaying basic symptoms of diseases. This might be followed by some practice case studies in which the participants read a case or look at pictures of animals to determine if they are healthy or displaying symptoms of an illness. Eventually, after all the basics are taught, the ideal situation would be to have the participants apply what they have learned by examining live animals. The next objective is identify common diseases in dairy cattle, including mastitis, parasites, and bovine respiratory disease complex. The instructional content will include topics such as an introduction to the diseases that commonly afflict cattle, how to identify symptoms that can be discovered through a physical examination, how to collect blood samples, and how to read the results of lab tests. First, we might have a 15 to 20 minute presentation on common bovine diseases. Then, the participants are given a set of half sheets of paper that each have a different symptom listed. The participants then determine which symptoms match with which diseases. This gives them an opportunity to practice pairing symptoms with diseases. Of course, there are many more common diseases that can be covered in the 15 to 20 minutes of lecture, so this might be done in stages of lecture, practice, lecture, practice. At the end of this time, the participants are put into groups and are given case studies and photos in which they must identify the symptoms and diseases that are presented. Then, the instructor demonstrates the proper techniques, including safety measures, for collecting a blood sample. The participants then have a practice activity where they demonstrate how to properly collect a blood sample, whether with a live animal or with a proxy. Finally, the instructor gives another lecture on how to read the results of a lab test. Then, the participants are given lab test results and are asked to work together in groups to read the tests and then report the results of the tests back to the group. So, when aligning instructional content to learning objectives, we first identify the knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behaviors that are required for the participants to achieve mastery of the objectives. Then, we determine the most appropriate methods for delivering that content, remembering to consider the principles of adult learning. Now for a brief review. Which of the following is the most appropriate method of developing instructional materials for training? A. Develop the instructional materials to match what must be learned for the participant to be able to achieve the learning objective. B. Develop the instructional materials based on what you are most interested in teaching. C. Develop the instructional materials based on what the participants find the most interesting. The correct answer is A. While the interests of the instructor and participants are certainly important, it is most appropriate to develop instructional content to match the learning objectives. Which of the following approaches would be most appropriate for teaching the learning objective? At the end of this training, the community animal health worker will be able to demonstrate the safety procedures for drawing blood from a dairy cow. A. An instructor demonstration of the safety procedures. B. A practice activity where participants learn to use the safety equipment. Or C. A case study where the participants identify where the people in the case study make mistakes in their safety procedures. All three of these activities are appropriate for delivering content that matches the learning objective. They also would work well as a set of activities. Please continue to the next video in this series, Developing Session Plans.